The first time my sister called me a burden in front of the whole family, she was wearing diamond studs I had quietly helped pay for. She said it lightly, almost like a joke. That was how she did most of her damage. Smile first, cut second, let everyone laugh before they realized there was blood in the room. It happened on a Sunday in late November, in my mother's dining room, under a chandelier that had no business hanging in a house my parents were still making payments on. 20 people were there: my parents, my sister and her husband, my cousins, two aunts, an uncle who always smelled like cedar and coffee, and enough side dishes to feed a wedding party. I was standing near the kitchen island with a serving spoon in one hand and a glass of sparkling water in the other when my sister looked straight at me and said, "Some of us actually know how to manage a life, not just a spreadsheet." Everybody heard it. A couple people laughed because they thought it was harmless. My mother smirked into her wine glass. My father did what he always did when my sister aimed a knife at me in public. He studied the turkey like it required his full moral attention. I remember the room in fragments, butter and rosemary in the air, the heat from the oven still trapped in the kitchen, the pale gold shine of the chandelier on the polished wood table. My cousin Lila lowering her eyes because even she knew that one had landed harder than usual. My sister, of course, kept going. She always did when she had an audience. That was the thing about being cast as the family disappointment. Eventually, people stop checking whether the story is true. That they just keep assigning you the same role because it makes the whole system easier to maintain. One child becomes the proof that the others are doing well. One child becomes the cautionary tale. In my family, that child was me. My name is Nora Hale. I was 34 that winter, single, disciplined, and doing well enough in my career that I had stopped explaining my salary to people who only respected money when it came wrapped in obvious luxury. I worked in risk management for a private investment firm. It was careful work, quiet work, the kind of work that paid very well but didn't photograph well. No one in my family understood it, and after a while I stopped trying to make them. To them, my sister Vivian was the success story. Vivian was 37, glossy in every possible sense. Had been married to a man named Colin who owned two dental practices and liked to say things like, "We've been very blessed," while standing in kitchens remodeled with borrowed money. Their life looked flawless from the outside. Big house, new cars every few years, matching luggage, family photos in coordinated creams and soft blues. Online, she made motherhood look like a brand campaign. In person, she made it look like a competition everyone else had already lost. Meanwhile, I lived alone in a one-bedroom condo downtown with good light, clean lines, and furniture I bought because I liked it, not because it impressed anybody. I drove a 6-year-old sedan that was fully paid off. I wore nice clothes, but you had to know fabric to know they were nice. I cooked at home. I saved aggressively. I invested. I slept well. But my family read all of that as lack. Vivian wore status the way some people wear perfume, strong enough to announce itself from across the room. She loved labels, loved stories that involved wait lists and exclusive access, loved saying things like, "It was a nightmare getting into that resort, but Colin made a call." My mother adored it. My father found it exhausting but mistook exhaustion for admiration. I learned early that the less I said, the easier family events went. Silence was not peace, but it was a form of damage control. What no one knew was that for almost 3 years, I had been quietly keeping my sister's life from caving in. It started with a call just after midnight on a Thursday in March. I remember because I was still awake, sitting at my dining table with my laptop open, reviewing a portfolio memo before a Friday meeting. Rain tapped against the windows in a thin, steady sheet, and the only light in the room was the brass lamp over my shoulder. When Vivian's name flashed on my screen, I nearly ignored it. She never called that late unless she wanted something. I answered anyway. She was crying before I even said hello. Not elegant crying either. Hard, panicked, wet breathing. The kind that makes you think hospital or police or blood. My whole body went cold. "Viv?" I said, already standing. "What happened? Are the kids okay?" "They're fine." She sniffed hard. "They're asleep. Nora, I made a mistake." There it was. The mistake, as she explained it in broken pieces, involved a credit card bill Colin didn't know about. She had used one card to cover part of a landscaping project because the backyard looked pathetic for a birthday party she was hosting. then used another card to cover back to school shopping, then another to pay the minimum on the first one. She kept saying it fast like speed could make it sound smaller. I can fix it, she said. I just need to get through this month. How much? I asked. A pause. 800. It was never 800 when she hesitated like that. How much, Vivian? Another pause, then smaller. 1460. I closed my eyes. At that point in my life, $1,400 would not ruin me. That was exactly why she called me and not anyone else. I had a stable income. I lived below my means. I did not ask questions she didn't want to answer unless I absolutely had to. That's in our family. I was useful in invisible ways. I was the sibling you called when something was embarrassing. If Colin finds out, she whispered, he's going to lose it. He already thinks I overspend. I just need a little room. I'll send it back in 2 weeks. I knew enough about money to hear the lie inside the promise. Not because she meant to lie in that exact moment, but because people in her kind of panic almost always believed a rescue was the same thing as a plan. Still, she was my sister. So I sent it. That should have been the end of it. 3 months later, she called again. This time she sounded ashamed in a quieter, more calculated way. There had been a problem with a tuition deposit for the older child's private school. A transfer hadn't cleared when she thought it would. Could I cover it for a few days? And then there was a boutique pop-up venture she had put money into with 2 other mothers from her social circle. Then a personal credit line she'd opened without telling Colin because she said she wanted something that was mine. Then one card became 3. Then 3 became a pattern. At first, I believed I was helping her stabilize. Then I realized I was helping her hide. There is a difference, and by the time you understand it, you are usually already trapped inside it. The first time I confronted her, we were sitting at a cafe with marble tables and terrible acoustics, the kind of place she liked because the pastries came dusted with gold flakes, and every drink looked expensive. I had brought a printout. She laughed when she saw it. You brought paperwork? I brought numbers, I said. Nick, you've asked me for money 7 times in 9 months. This isn't random anymore. Her smile slipped. I kept my voice low. You're not reducing the balances. You're moving them around. That's why the requests keep changing. The cafe smelled like espresso and orange peel. I remember the tiny sound her spoon made against the saucer as she set it down too hard. You don't understand my life, she said. No, I said. I understand debt. That should have offended her enough to end it, but instead she leaned in and did something much more dangerous. She made me feel necessary. You're the only person I can tell the truth to, she said. I hated how quickly those words found a weakness in me. My sister had spent most of my life acting like I was stiff, boring, too serious, too plain, too practical. When we were kids, she'd borrow my things and return them damaged, then convince our mother I had handed them over willingly. When we were teenagers, she'd invite me out with her friends just to leave me standing alone while she disappeared into better lit corners of the room. By adulthood, our relationship had become polite on the surface and predatory underneath. She needed admiration from people who mattered socially. She needed rescue from people she considered emotionally durable. I fell into the second category. So when she looked at me with tears gathering again and said, "You're the only one who doesn't make me feel stupid," something in me softened that should not have softened. I agreed to help her make a plan. The plan lasted 6 weeks before it became another lie. I told myself I was protecting the children. I told myself I was preventing a worse disaster. I told myself once she got past this rough stretch, she would recover, repay me slowly, maybe even thank me in some meaningful adult way. But people do not become honest because you quietly absorb the cost of their dishonesty. They become more comfortable. By the second year, I stopped thinking of the payments as emergencies and started thinking of them as a private tax for having the misfortune of loving someone irresponsible. Not every month was huge. That would have been easier to reject. The genius of the arrangement was its unpredictability. 900 here, 600 there. A utility bill, a payment to keep a card current, a transfer so a checking account didn't overdraw. Then occasionally something larger that hit like a dropped piano. A jewelry purchase she said she regretted. As a travel balance she swore she had expected Colin to cover. A cosmetic procedure she told me not to judge because you don't get what it's like in my circles. That phrase stayed with me. In my circles. As if I lived underground. As if her life was a level I had failed to reach. Every time I considered walking away, she found the right pressure point. She'd call me from a parking lot crying. Or say one of the kids was in the back seat and she couldn't stop shaking. Or tell me Colin had started asking questions, and if he found out the full amount, he would take over everything and she would never forgive me for letting that happen. That was her talent. She could make her deception feel like your betrayal. I knew better, and I kept helping anyway. There are kinds of intelligence that serve you at work and fail you completely in a family system built on guilt. I could read a balance sheet in minutes. I could detect weak controls in a reporting structure before other people even noticed there was exposure. I could sit across from wealthy men twice my age and explain calmly and precisely where their assumptions had outpaced reality. None of that helped when my mother called me cold for not answering family group chats fast enough. None of it helped when Vivian showed up at Sunday lunch with a new handbag, and my father looked at her the way men look at daughters who still know how to perform admiration for them. I became very good at compartmentalizing. I paid my sister's minimums from an account I had set aside specifically for messy obligations. I kept records. That's because record keeping soothed me, and because some part of me always knew I might need proof one day. I saved every message, every "I'll send it next Friday," every "I'm so sorry, I hate asking," every "please don't let this blow up my marriage." I exported them quarterly into folders with neutral names. That was my private contradiction. I was still helping her, but somewhere deep down, I had already started building the file that would survive her. By the fall before that Thanksgiving, the numbers had become impossible to romanticize. I sat at my kitchen counter one Saturday morning with a mug of coffee going cold beside me and finally totaled everything: requests, transfers, card payments, emergency patches, short term bridges that were never short term. The sum made me stare at the screen for a full minute. $38,620. That was the amount I could verify cleanly without estimating any of the smaller cash gaps she had repaid and reopened over time. Nearly $39,000 had left my accounts and gone into preserving my sister's image of herself. I called her that afternoon. She answered on the third ring, distracted and cheerful. I could hear traffic and one of her children asking for something in the background. "Can you talk?" I asked. "Make it quick. We're on our way to a birthday party. I totaled what I've sent you." Silence. Then, "Okay. It's just under 39,000. Another silence. Longer this time. "You always make it sound so dramatic when you say numbers like that." The calm in her voice did something terrible to me. It was worse than panic, worse than tears. Yes, it meant she had normalized it. "I'm not making it sound like anything," I said. "That is the number." "Well, I didn't ask for it all at once." I actually laughed. Once. Short and stunned. "That's your defense? Nora, please don't do this right now." "No, we're doing it now." I stood up and paced to the window, looking down at the street below. A woman in a red coat was walking a tiny white dog. Ordinary life continuing, which offended me for some reason. "This has to stop." "It will stop," she said quickly. "After the holidays. You said that in April. This time I mean it. You always mean it in the moment." Her voice changed then, sharper. "You don't understand how hard it is to keep everything together." And there it was again. Everything together, meaning the house, the look, the social standing, the performance. That not the marriage, not the children, not her health, the facade. I said, "You are not keeping things together. You are financing appearances with debt and asking me to stand underneath the collapse." She exhaled hard enough for me to hear it through the phone. "You make me sound disgusting." "No," I said quietly. "Your behavior does that on its own." She hung up on me. 10 minutes later, she texted a single line. "Please don't make this bigger than it has to be." That message sat under my skin for weeks, because in my family, that sentence translated to something very specific. Do not interrupt the existing version of reality. Do not embarrass the person who already has more social capital than you. Do not bring truth into a room built on preference. Thanksgiving approached the way it always did, when with too many logistics and not enough sincerity. My mother sent menus in the group chat as if she were organizing a state dinner. Vivian volunteered to bring a beautiful grazing board and used the word beautiful twice. My father announced the game time none of the women cared about. My cousin Lila privately texted me, "Are you surviving?" which told me exactly how much she already knew without anyone saying it out loud. I considered not going. I really did. But skipping a holiday in my family wasn't treated as self-protection. It was treated as an offense, an admission, a confession no one had earned. Absence would have become its own story. So I bought a bottle of wine, made the sweet potato casserole my mother always assigned me because it was simple, and drove out to the house I'd been entering with a clenched jaw since childhood. But the sky that day was pale and cold. Bare branches scratched across the edges of the neighborhood like dark handwriting. My parents lived in a development full of oversized homes trying to imitate old money. Stone veneer, arched windows, decorative lanterns by the garage. It all looked expensive from the street and slightly hollow up close. When I walked in, the house was already loud. Children running, men arguing over football, my mother barking instructions from the kitchen without ever sounding ruffled enough to stop. The smell of sage, butter, onions, and polished wood. Heat pressed against my face the second the door closed behind me. Nora, there you are, my mother called. Put your dish in the kitchen, and for heaven's sake, take off that coat. Yeah, you look like you're here for a dentist appointment. That was her version of affection. I set the casserole down, hugged the required relatives, accepted the required remarks about how I was still so tiny, and kept my expression neutral. Vivian arrived 25 minutes late, glowing from the cold and from being expected. She swept into the foyer with a camel coat draped over her shoulders, glossy hair, perfect, lips the color of expensive berries, carrying a giant board crowded with cured meat, fruit, cheeses, rosemary sprigs, edible flowers, and tiny gold serving tongs. Of course she was. My mother lit up like someone had flipped a switch inside her. "Oh, that is gorgeous," she breathed. Vivian laughed, soft and modest in the way only immodest people can manage. "It's nothing. I just wanted it to look festive." Then she saw me. As something unreadable flickered across her face. Not guilt, not fear, annoyance maybe that I had shown up anyway. She kissed the air near my cheek and said, "You look comfortable." I smiled without showing teeth. "You look expensive." Her eyes sharpened, but only for a second. That was the beginning. By the time we all sat down to eat, I already knew the day was going to go bad. I just didn't know yet how public it would become, or how close I was to the moment when my sister would finally say the one thing she could never pull back, and I would stop being the woman who absorbed it. Dinner started the way family dinners always start, when everyone involved has spent years rehearsing the same hierarchy. My father carved the turkey at the head of the table like he was performing something ceremonial. But my mother floated between chairs with a serving spoon and her usual anxious authority, making sure everyone noticed how hard she had worked, while also making sure nobody helped in a way that threatened her control. The children were sent to the smaller table in the breakfast nook, where they could be noisy without interfering with adult performances. Glasses clinked. Silverware tapped china. Someone laughed too loudly at one of Colin's stories before it was actually funny. I took the same seat I always took, 3 chairs down from the end, close enough to be included, far enough to be peripheral. Vivian sat opposite me in cream silk, her hair tucked behind one ear to show off diamond studs that flashed every time she turned her head. Colin sat beside her, broad-shouldered and handsome in a clean, forgettable way. The kind of man who looked more substantial than he was because he had money and a good posture. He was not cruel, exactly. He was simply the kind of husband who preferred peace to truth, which in practice had made him a useful shelter for my sister's lies. My cousin Lila sat on my left. Across from her was our younger cousin Tessa, who had just finished graduate school and still had the raw, uncertain energy of someone standing at the edge of adult life, trying not to sound scared. My Aunt Marina had brought 3 kinds of pie and already mentioned each one twice. My Uncle Ray had red wine in one hand and opinions about interest rates in the other. The table was crowded with dishes in polished serving bowls, all oranges and browns and deep green. Candles burned down the center in glass hurricanes. The air smelled rich and overseasoned. And on the surface, it was lovely. Underneath, it had all the emotional safety of a carpeted stairwell. I have often thought that humiliation arrives first in the body. Before the mind catches up, the body knows. It shows up as a tightening in the throat, a sudden drop in the stomach, a small electrical change under the skin that tells you the room is no longer neutral. That night I felt it early, not because anyone had said anything terrible yet, but because I knew my sister well enough to recognize the specific brightness in her voice when she was hunting for admiration. She was in one of her moods, effortless, funny, generous with attention in a way that made people feel chosen. She knew exactly when to touch my mother's wrist and tell her the table looked stunning. Exactly when to praise one of my father's old stories so he'd tell it again with twice the volume. exactly when to lower her voice and mention a charity event or a school fundraiser or a family they knew who had gone through such a rough patch, so everyone could admire how connected she was to suffering without ever having to carry any of it. It would have been impressive if it weren't so exhausting to watch. I stayed quiet. That was another thing I had learned young. In certain rooms, competency is a threat if it comes in the wrong package. Vivian could talk about money as long as it remained abstract, decorative, aspirational. Vacations, renovations, membership fees, school tuition, investments in things that were not investments. But the second I spoke concretely, with structure or analysis or caution, I was no longer neutral. I became corrective, and in my family, corrective women were punished. So I passed dishes. I smiled when directly addressed. I asked Tessa how her new job search was going. I complimented Aunt Marina's pie crust. I let my father talk about mortgage rates as if he were personally steering the economy. Then Tessa made the mistake that turned the evening. It was not even a dramatic mistake, just ordinary honesty. She had been quiet through most of dinner, poking at her stuffing, smiling when spoken to, nodding at things she clearly wasn't listening to. At one point, Uncle Ray made some broad comment about how young people just don't want to work anymore, and Tessa gave a sharp little laugh that sounded dangerously close to a cry. My mother noticed. What's the matter? Sweetheart? She asked in the tone she reserved for other people's daughters. Tessa hesitated, then shrugged. Nothing. I'm just tired. Job hunting? Aunt Marina asked. Tessa nodded and pushed a piece of turkey around her plate. That and my loan payments kicked in last month, and I guess I underestimated how bad it would feel to watch that much money leave my account while I'm still trying to get stable. There was an immediate chorus of soft sympathy around the table. That's so hard, Aunt Marina said. It's criminal what they do to young people, Uncle Ray added, even though he'd just blamed an entire generation for economic conditions he did not understand. Tessa gave a weak smile. I'm fine, it's just tight right now. Now in a healthier family that might have led to useful conversation. A few practical suggestions. If maybe someone asking what the interest rates were, maybe a recommendation for refinancing, consolidation, employer assistance, or a side income strategy that wasn't delusional. I could have helped her in 15 minutes. I had walked 3 different friends through debt restructuring. I knew how to evaluate repayment options, which lenders were flexible, how to identify which balances to target first, how to lower the emotional temperature around money long enough to make good decisions. It was literally part of how my brain worked. So when Tessa looked down at her plate with that expression people get when they are trying not to seem panicked in public, I leaned slightly toward her and said quietly, if you want, I can send you a few tools that might help. That there are some good consolidation routes depending on your rates. I barely finished the sentence before my mother cut across it. Oh, let's not turn Thanksgiving into a seminar. A few people laughed, not cruelly, not fully, just enough. I felt the first sting in my chest. I started. Tessa doesn't need a spreadsheet on a holiday, my mother said, smiling tightly. She needs to enjoy dinner. I could have let it go. Normally I would have, but Tessa glanced at me with the kind of hope people get when they hear a rope hit the water. So I said, just as lightly, I can send it later. That was when Vivian looked up from her wine and joined in. Honestly, she said, waving a hand, money stress isn't always about math. Sometimes people just need confidence. My mother nodded immediately as if this were wisdom. As Vivian continued, if you act scared around money, it controls you. You have to think abundance. I stared at her. Across the table, Lila stopped chewing. Tessa blinked. I'm not sure abundance changes the payment amount. Vivian laughed. No, but mindset affects everything. You have to stop seeing yourself as broke. There was a soft murmur of approval from exactly the people you would expect. My mother, Aunt Marina, even my father, who liked any financial philosophy that sounded optimistic enough to avoid details. I felt something bitter move behind my ribs, because 3 nights earlier, Vivian had texted me at 11:48 p.m., asking if I could cover an insurance draft that had hit the wrong account. Abundance. That was the word she chose while sitting across from me in silk and borrowed solvency. And I looked down at my plate and said nothing. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. After dinner, people drifted the way they always did. The men migrated toward football and decibels. The mothers reorganized children and leftovers. My aunt began discussing Christmas schedules before Thanksgiving dessert had even been served. The formal tension of the table broke into little conversational islands. I carried empty serving bowls into the kitchen, grateful for something to do with my hands. Tessa followed a few minutes later, pretending to look for seltzer. When the room was briefly clear except for the two of us, she stood near the counter and said in a low voice, "I actually would like those tools, if you meant it." Of course I meant it. Her shoulders loosened a little. "Thanks." As I didn't want to sound pathetic out there. "You didn't." She gave me a tired smile. "It's just a lot. Every month I make the payments and it feels like nothing changes." I know. The kitchen was warm from the oven and smelled like baked sugar and dish soap. Through the doorway, we could hear the television from the den and children shrieking over something in the breakfast nook. It felt like a pocket of temporary privacy, the kind families accidentally create and then quickly punish if anything honest starts to happen inside it. I reached for my phone. "I can text you a few lenders to compare, and if you want, I can help you map out." "Oh my God, Nora, can you not?" Vivian, her voice hit the room before she did. She stood in the doorway with a wine glass in one hand and a look on her face that was almost amused, but which somehow made it worse. My mother was a few steps behind her carrying an empty platter. Tessa immediately stepped back. "I was just offering to send her some resources," I said. Vivian took a sip and leaned against the frame. "You always do this." "Do what?" "Insert yourself and make everything weirdly intense." My mother, without missing a beat, set the platter down and said, "Not everyone wants every problem turned into a financial case study." There was a tiny suspended moment in which I could have laughed it off, but I was tired, tired in the bones, tired of years, tired of watching my sister cosplay competence with money I had quietly redirected out of my own life, tired of being useful in private and diminished in public. So I said, "Trying to help is not making things intense." Vivian tilted her head. "No, but making people feel dumb definitely is." I wasn't making her feel dumb. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You don't always hear yourself." That was the opening she needed. Once she had one, she never stopped at one cut. My mother sighed in that specific disappointed way that meant she had already decided who the problem was. "Honestly, Nora, sometimes your tone can be a little clinical." Clinical. It was one of the family words for me, along with rigid, severe, dry, defensive, intimidating, serious, practical to a fault. Every neutral trait became an accusation when it belonged to the wrong daughter. Tessa, poor thing, tried to help. She was being nice, Aunt Claire. Vivian turned to her with instant brightness. "Sweetheart, I know. I just don't want you getting overwhelmed. Advice is easy. Real life is harder." Real life. Again, I said nothing, because if I had opened my mouth right then, years would have come out. Instead, I put my phone back in my pocket and said, "Forget it." That could still have ended the moment. Then my mother said, "It's probably for the best." I looked at her. She straightened a stack of dessert plates without meeting my eyes. Money is a sensitive subject, and sometimes the people who talk about it the most are the ones with the most issues around it. There are lines that sound harmless if you do not know the family they come from. If you had walked into that kitchen cold, you might have thought she was being general. Philosophical, even. She wasn't. She was looking directly at me. And Vivian knew it. She gave a little laugh and said, "Exactly." I felt my face go still. "Excuse me?" I said. Vivian's eyes flashed with the pleasure of finally arriving where she wanted to go. "Come on, Nora. You love telling everybody how to manage money, but you can barely manage your own life." The room sharpened, really sharpened. Somewhere behind me, I heard the refrigerator motor hum to life. I heard a child yell from the other room. I heard a fork fall in the sink. Strange what the mind collects when it realizes impact is coming. I said very carefully, "What exactly do you think you know about my life?" My mother stepped in too late, but not to protect me, to protect the optics. "Girls, let's not." Vivian ignored her. "I know enough. You live alone in that tiny condo, like you're still in your 20s. You never go anywhere. You drive that depressing car. Like you act like basic adulthood is beneath you because you can make a chart." Tessa went motionless. I looked at my sister and thought with sudden cold clarity, "You really believe this?" Not that she believed I was financially irresponsible. She wasn't stupid enough for that, but she believed she had enough social momentum to say anything she wanted and have the room bend around it. She believed appearance had always beaten truth in this family and always would. The kitchen had started to fill. Aunt Marina at the counter by the pies, Uncle Ray wandering in for another drink, Lila appearing silently beside the island, my father pausing just outside the doorway as if conflict were whether he might outwait. The audience was forming. Vivian saw it too, and because she had spent her entire life mistaking attention for safety, she went bigger. She does this every holiday, she said, now speaking not just to me but to the room. Comes in acting superior, giving everyone advice, judging people's choices when she can barely keep herself afloat. Something in my chest turned to stone. I said, "You need to stop." "Oh, please," she laughed, ugly now, no grace left in it. "You're always one crisis away from asking somebody for help." The lie was so cleanly delivered that for a fraction of a second I felt disoriented. Because that was the real power of certain people. Not that they lied with the confidence of someone who had been protected from contradiction for so long, it felt rude to even attempt it. My mother finally looked alarmed, but only because the room had gotten too quiet. "Vivian," she said. "What?" Vivian snapped, and then immediately softened her face into innocence. "I'm just saying what everybody already knows." Nobody said anything. That was the moment I understood what silence really meant in that family. It was not neutrality, it was ratification. My father cleared his throat. "Maybe this conversation has gone far enough." But even then, he didn't say she was wrong. He didn't say, "That's unfair." He didn't say, "Knock it off." He just wanted the discomfort to stop. I looked from one face to another. My mother, tense but not outraged. My father, embarrassed but inactive. Aunt Marina pretending she had not heard enough to intervene. Uncle Ray suddenly fascinated by the label on a bottle. Tessa mortified, Lila furious on my behalf, but still too conditioned to blow up the room. Then Vivian delivered the line that broke whatever I had left to protect. "Like you've been circling me for money for months," she said. "So maybe don't stand here acting like you're some kind of expert." The world did not exactly stop, but my relationship to it did, because that was the inversion. That was the masterpiece. She had taken the private truth and flipped it inside out in front of an audience, counting on the fact that shame works fastest when the person being attacked is the one least likely to make a scene. I felt heat rise into my face and then disappear just as quickly, replaced by something colder and cleaner. "I have never asked you for money," I said. Vivian rolled her eyes. "Nora, not once." She laughed again now with open contempt. "You called me last month." Yes, I had. That's to tell her I was done carrying an arrangement that was consuming thousands of dollars a month, while she bought things no one needed and lied to everyone who loved her. She had just turned the entire interaction into the opposite story. I looked at my mother. "Do you believe her?" My mother's expression shifted into that awful polished sadness she wore when she wanted to seem compassionate while delivering blame. "If something is going on, you could have told us." Something, as though I were the one hiding a disaster. I looked at my father. He rubbed the back of his neck and said, "If you're struggling, Nora, there's no shame in it, but this isn't the way." I almost laughed. There's a point in certain betrayals where the pain becomes so complete it loops around and turns into lucidity. I was standing in a kitchen full of people who had just watched my sister accuse me of asking her for money while I knew with documentary precision that I had paid tens of thousands of dollars to protect her from the consequences of her own life. And not one person in that room had enough trust in my character to pause before accepting her version. I had never been more alone in my family than I was in that crowded kitchen. Vivian saw that too. She mistook it for victory. She folded her arms and said, "Maybe now you understand how embarrassing it is." There was a soft intake of breath somewhere behind me. From Lila, I think, or Tessa. It doesn't matter. What mattered was what happened inside me. People always imagine breaking points as loud, a scream, a slammed door, a thrown glass. But my real breaking point was silent. And it was the exact moment I stopped hoping they would see me correctly if I just explained well enough. The hope died. And in the space where it died, something much more useful took its place. I thought of the folder on my laptop, the exported messages, the payment confirmations, the recurring transfers, the late night voicemails, the account numbers I knew by memory because I had entered them so many times. I thought of every month I had rearranged my own plans to absorb her chaos. The trip to Montreal I never booked, the bathroom renovation I postponed, the additional money that could have gone into my brokerage account, the quiet humiliation of helping someone who would later use your help as a weapon. I thought of the phrase she had just chosen: stop circling me for money. And I saw suddenly and completely how this ended. Not with an argument, not with a speech, not with a dramatic exposure that would let them call me vindictive. With absence, with withdrawal, with gravity. I reached into my coat pocket and took out my phone. My mother's voice snapped. What are you doing? I unlocked the screen. Vivian gave a little exasperated laugh. Oh my God, are you seriously going to stand there and make a point? I looked at her. No anger in me now, just precision. You're right, I said. The room went still. My sister blinked. What? You're absolutely right. My thumb moved calmly across the screen as I opened my banking app. This has gone on long enough. At first, no one understood. They thought I was conceding, apologizing maybe, accepting the role they had assigned me because the room was pressuring me to accept it. Then I opened the scheduled transfers. Yes, there they were, 6 recurring payments lined up for the 1st and 15th of each month, neat as a row of lit fuses: card services, auto loan, insurance draft, personal line, household float. I knew everyone. I canceled the first one, then the second, then the third. My mother said my name sharply. Nora. I did not look up. Vivian's voice had changed. What are you doing? I canceled the 4th, then the 5th, then the 6th. There is a particular kind of silence that comes only when people realize the invisible structure holding up their assumptions may have just shifted under their feet. That silence filled the kitchen. Colin stepped forward from the doorway for the first time, confusion furrowing his face. Vivian? She was staring at me now, really staring. Her skin had gone a shade lighter. Nora, she said, much lower. But stop. I lifted my eyes to hers and said in the calmest voice I had used all night, I'm taking your advice. My mother looked between us. What does that mean? It means, I said, I'm done making my problems everyone else's problem. The line landed because it was hers, or rather Vivian's. I watched the recognition hit her. Not fully, not yet, but enough. Her hand tightened around the stem of her wine glass. Don't do this here. Interesting, I said. That concern feels very new. Nora, my father said, his voice warning now, because whatever was happening had finally become important enough for him to dislike it. Still, he did not know what it was. That was almost funny. My phone buzzed once in my hand, then again, bank confirmations. It's immediate cancellations of recurring drafts that had been in place long enough to behave like infrastructure. Vivian's own phone lit up on the counter beside the sink. She saw it, ignored it. Then it lit again and again, one of the cards probably flagging a failed draft or alerting her to a removed payment arrangement. Her breathing changed. Colin noticed. Vivian, he said again more firmly. She snapped. Not now. The entire room had shifted from family drama into something sharper and far more dangerous, because everyone could sense that the argument they thought they were watching had never actually been the argument at all. Something hidden had entered the room, and it had my face. My mother looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. What have you done? I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. Nothing dramatic, I said. I've simply stopped paying bills that aren't mine. I let that sit. No one moved, no one spoke. Across from me, Tessa looked like she had forgotten how. Colin frowned. What bills? Vivian turned on me with open panic now. Shut up. That did it. Not because she ordered me to, but because in that exact second, I understood she still believed she could control the terms. She still believed shame was hers to assign. Even now. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. My mother took a step forward. Nora, you are not leaving this house until you explain what you just said. I looked at her and felt a very old sadness pass through me without stopping. Actually, I said, sliding one arm into my coat, I think I explained more than enough. Vivian's phone buzzed again, then rang. As this time, Colin grabbed it off the counter before she could stop him. Her face changed completely. I will never forget it. Some people think exposure looks like rage. It doesn't always. Sometimes it looks like terror wrapped in social training, a person trying to keep their expression arranged while the life behind it begins to split. Give me that, she hissed. But Colin had already seen enough to know the message mattered. He glanced at the screen, then at her, then at me. What payment arrangement? He asked. No one answered, because now the room belonged to reality, and reality had terrible timing and no loyalty to the version of things my sister preferred. I buttoned my coat. My father said, Nora. There was something in his voice now I had wanted all my life. Urgency, not because I was hurt. And because I might be holding the information. Too late. I walked toward the foyer. The hardwood was warm under my feet. The house suddenly smelled too sweet, too crowded with food and candle wax and years of pretending. Behind me, I could hear overlapping voices start to rise. What is he talking about? Vivienne? Colin, not in front of everybody. What arrangement? She's overreacting. Overreacting to what? I did not turn around. At the front door, my mother called my name again, sharper, frightened now, not for me, but for the shape of the evening, for the family story tearing in public, for the possibility that the wrong daughter had just become dangerous. I opened the door, cold air hit my face, and for the first time in years, I felt no need to stay and manage anyone else's fallout. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and walked to my car while the muffled sound of raised voices bled through the walls of the house. My hands were steady when I started the engine. My phone began ringing before I had reached the end of the street. Vivian, I declined it. Then again, declined. Then my mother, declined. Then Colin, that one I let ring until it stopped. Street lights flashed across the windshield in even intervals as I drove back toward the city. The roads were mostly clear, the sky dark and dry now, the kind of cold night where every porch light looks a little harsher than usual. My chest hurt, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't panic, it was release. Painful, yes, but cleaner than what I had been carrying. By the time I reached my condo building, I had 16 missed calls and 11 text messages. The first from Vivian, what did you do? As then, call me right now. Then, Nora, please. Then 10 minutes later, when panic had begun to outrun entitlement, you can't just do this without warning. I parked, rode the elevator up, let myself into the quiet warmth of my condo, locked the door, and leaned against it for a full 10 seconds. Everything was still. No football, no dishes, no strategic laughter from the next room. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant rush of traffic from the avenue below. I set my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, took off my coat, and moved automatically toward the kitchen. Tea first. Always tea first. The kettle hissed to life while my phone buzzed across the counter. I ignored it and opened my laptop instead. There are people who cry after a rupture like that. There are people who pace, call friends, replay every line. I rehearse future arguments. I made a file. Not because I felt nothing, I felt too much. And when I feel too much, I organize. I opened the folder I had been building for almost 3 years and began reviewing its contents with a level of focus that would have made my managing director proud. Messages, screenshots, bank transfers, payment confirmations, notes from phone calls, dates, amounts, account endings, repeated promises, explicit requests for secrecy, explicit admissions of debt, explicit acknowledgments that I was covering balances so Colin would not find out. I started building a clean chronology. March, first transfer. June, second. September, tuition bridge. January, card minimums, insurance draft, auto payment, household transfer, emergency cash, late night panic call, apology, promise, repeat. The kettle clicked off. Had I poured the water over tea and kept working, my phone vibrated again and again until I finally turned it face down. At 10:14 p.m., Colin sent a text. I'm sorry to contact you directly. I think we need to talk. I did not answer. At 10:22, my mother sent, I don't know what game you're playing, but this has gone far enough. At 10:31, my father sent, call us, tonight. At 10:47, Vivian sent the message that told me the entire structure had finally cracked. He knows. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I set the phone aside and went back to the file. Because the truth was, I had spent years rescuing my sister from consequences she had fully earned. If I was going to survive what came next, I needed to stop treating documentation like a backup plan and start treating it like a shield. Outside, the city had gone quiet in that holiday way, as if people had all retreated into their own private versions of gratitude and disappointment. The lamplight in my living room pooled gold across the rug. Steam rose from the tea I had forgotten to drink. My laptop screen cast a clean white glow over the table. I worked until after midnight. By then, the chronology was nearly complete. The evidence folder neatly labeled, the total amount updated one final time to include the payments I had just canceled before they could process again. $39,480. I sat back and looked at the number. Then I opened a new document and typed a title across the top. For the avoidance of confusion. That was when I knew I was no longer trying to survive the family story. I was preparing to end it. I slept for 3 hours. And not because I was calm, because my body gave out before my mind did. I woke just after 5 to the gray light of morning pressing through the blinds and the stale taste of unfinished tea in the back of my throat. For a few seconds, I lay there disoriented, tangled in sheets, my phone dark on the nightstand, the apartment silent around me. Then the previous night landed all at once. The kitchen, the lie. Vivian's face when Colin took her phone. The cold air outside my parents' house. I sat up, reached for my phone, and saw 27 notifications. Missed calls from my mother, father, Vivian, and one from Colin at 12:11 a.m. 3 voicemails, 9 text messages, 2 new emails, and a message from my cousin Lila sent at 1:04 in the morning that said only, "Are you okay?" That was the one I answered first. "I'm fine, just tired." 3 dots appeared almost immediately. "You were not the problem in that kitchen." I stared at that line longer than I expected to. Then I typed, I know it was the first time I had ever written those words in relation to my family without qualifying them. No, maybe. No, I think. No, I just don't want drama. Just I know. That did more for me than sleep had. I left the phone on the bed, showered, tied my hair back, and dressed the way I always dressed when I needed to feel precise. Black trousers, cream blouse, gray cardigan. No jewelry except small gold hoops and the watch I wore every day. My face in the mirror looked paler than usual, but steady. By the time I sat down at the kitchen counter with coffee and my laptop, the apartment had warmed with morning light. Outside, downtown was waking slowly. Delivery trucks. At a bus hissing at the curb, someone in a navy coat walking a dog past a corner cafe. Ordinary motion, useful somehow. It reminded me that no matter how large a family rupture feels inside your body, the world does not stop to admire it. I opened the file I had built the night before and read it through from start to finish. The timeline was clean, too clean, really, almost clinical in the way my mother would have hated. Dates, transfer amounts, payment descriptions, screenshots of texts where Vivian used words like desperate, temporary, please don't let Colin find out, I swear I'll fix this, I'm drowning. Screenshots of later messages where she thanked me, apologized, promised to send at least something next month, then returned with a new excuse before the old promise had cooled. As in one message from the previous spring, she had written, "You're the only reason this hasn't blown up in my face." I highlighted it. In another, "Please don't make me say this out loud. I need you. Just until I get past this." I highlighted that too. By 6:30, I had turned the file into 2 versions. One was complete. Every screenshot, every transfer record, every note. 41 pages with appendices. The second was shorter, cleaner. A summary with a table of totals, a simple timeline, and just enough supporting screenshots to make denial impossible. I saved both as PDFs. Then I emailed them to myself from my personal account to my work archive account and to a secure storage folder I use for financial documents. I wasn't paranoid by nature, but years in risk management teach you to respect 2 things above all others: memory failure and narrative manipulation. If a story matters, preserve it somewhere nobody else controls. At 7:15, my phone rang. My mother. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. She did not say hello. "What have you done?" Not "are you all right?" Not "we need to talk." Not "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Just accusation, immediate and clean. I sipped my coffee before answering. "Good morning, Mom." "Nora, I am not in the mood for this." "No," I said. "You're in the mood for control." Silence. Then very tightly, "Vivian is beside herself." That almost made me laugh. "Is she?" "Yes, is she? Colin found out about things that were not your place to interfere with." I put my mug down. "That's interesting phrasing." "Oh, don't do that voice with me." That voice, the calm one, the one she hated because it meant emotional leverage was slipping. I said, "What exactly do you think I interfered with?" "You humiliated your sister in front of her husband." I closed my eyes for 1 second, opened them again, and looked out at the pale morning over the city. "No, your daughter humiliated me in front of the entire family while I was privately covering expenses she was hiding from her husband." I stopped. Reality did the rest. My mother inhaled sharply. "She made a mean comment." "A mean comment?" I repeated. "You know what I mean." "No," I said. "I don't think I do." Her voice changed then, took on that brittle reasonableness she wore when trying to usher the truth into a smaller container. Nora, whatever arrangement existed between you and Vivian, yes, it did not have to be exposed that way. The anger that rose in me was not hot. It was colder than that, more useful. Exposed by whom? You know what I mean. I canceled my own transfers. And you knew what that would trigger. Yes, I said, eventually. That was the point. She fell quiet. I could hear movement on her end. Cabinet doors, maybe. A spoon against ceramic. She was in her kitchen, no doubt standing barefoot on the same polished tile where she had watched my sister lie and chosen comfort over truth. Finally, she said, "How much?" I leaned back in my chair. "You believe me now?" "Nora, how much would have made you believe me sooner?" I asked. 5,000, 10, 20? Stop being dramatic and answer the question. There it was again. In my family, anything too true was drama. $39,480, I said. Silence. Then very faintly, "What?" "That's what I have directly documented. If I count a few smaller reimbursements and recurring household gaps that got paid back and reopened, it's higher, but that is the clean number." Another silence. Longer this time. My mother spoke more softly when she was genuinely thrown. "Over what period?" 2 years and 9 months. "Nora," she said, and for the first time there was no accusation in it, only shock. "Why would you do that?" I laughed once because I honestly did not know how to answer a question that stupid. Because she called crying, because she said she was in trouble, because she said Colin didn't know, because I was trying to keep her from blowing up her life. Pick one. "You should have told us." I stood and carried my mug to the sink. You should have believed me before asking her." "That is not fair." That was almost enough to break my composure. I gripped the edge of the counter and said very evenly, "Fair would have been you stopping her when she called me a beggar in your kitchen. Fair would have been you asking one follow-up question before deciding I was the embarrassing one. Fair would have been you being more disturbed by a lie than by the discomfort of the hearing it corrected." My mother had no response to that, so I kept going. "She told everyone I was circling her for money. I have nearly 3 years of records showing the exact opposite. She accused me of financial incompetence while I was covering her car, her cards, her insurance, and whatever else she couldn't keep afloat long enough to perform success. So if she's upset now, I suggest she sit with the feeling." When my mother finally spoke again, her voice had gone flat. "Colin is furious. That sounds like a marriage issue. She says you blindsided her." I turned and looked at my reflection in the kitchen window. "That's funny. I'd say I was very patient." My mother exhaled through her nose. "Can you at least talk to her?" "No. She's your sister. And for years I acted like it." "That's cold." "No," I said. "Cold would have been letting the cards default 6 months ago." Then I hung up. My hands were shaking when I set the phone down, but not from guilt, from force withheld. It takes effort to speak the truth to people who trained you to make yourself smaller before you entered the room. At 8:03, Colin called. I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I answered. No, because unlike the rest of my family, he at least had the decency to sound ashamed when he stepped in something rotten. "Nora?" "Yes." His voice was rough, like he had either not slept or had spent the night arguing. "I'm sorry to call you. You already said that in your text. I know, I didn't know if you'd answer. I'm listening." A pause. Then, "Everything you said last night, was it true?" I looked at the coffee ring my mug had left on the counter. "Which part?" He let out a breath that sounded halfway to a laugh and nowhere near humor. "That you were paying bills? That there were recurring transfers?" "Yes." Another pause. "How many?" "6 current ones when I canceled them." I heard him sit down hard on the other end of the line. The faint sound of a chair creaking. Then quieter. "How long?" "Long enough that you should probably sit with what it means that you didn't know." That landed. He didn't defend himself. I respected that. Instead, he said, "She told me she had a little discretionary balance on one card. That was it." Then she lied. "Yes," he said. And this time there was no hesitation. She did. The apartment felt very still around me. Morning light now fully across the floor. The heat clicking on. A siren far off and fading. I said, "Why are you calling Colin?" "Because I'm trying to understand the damage." I appreciated the phrasing, not the optics, not the misunderstanding, the damage. So I gave him the cleaner version, not the whole file, not yet. Just the framework, multiple cards, one personal line, a vehicle payment patch, insurance drafts, household shortfalls when she moved money and hoped he wouldn't notice. I kept my voice even and my language precise. I did not editorialize. I did not mention the years of insults, the family dynamic, the sick little pleasure she took in diminishing me while taking my money. None of that was necessary for this particular conversation. When I finished, Colin said nothing for a while. Then, I don't know what to say. Try the truth. He was quiet again. Then he said, the truth is that I am embarrassed. I leaned against the counter. That makes two of us. No, he said quickly. Not like that. I mean, I'm embarrassed that you carried this and I didn't see it. I'm embarrassed that she put you in that position, and I'm embarrassed that she said what she said in front of everyone. I did not answer. No, because part of me wanted to accept that. Another part wanted to ask where this moral clarity had been while he enjoyed the polished surface my money had been quietly supporting. But in fairness, he had not known. And while ignorance does not erase benefit, it does alter blame. Finally, I said, I didn't do it for you. I know. Good. Then his voice dropped. She told me you were exaggerating, that you offered help sometimes, but she never asked for ongoing support. I looked at the 2 PDF files open on my laptop. Would you like documentation? He exhaled slowly. Yes, I can send a summary. Please. I hesitated only once. Then I attached the shorter PDF to an email, wrote a single line above it, per your request. This is a summary only. And hit send. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed with his reply. Received, then. Yet after another minute, Jesus Christ. I sat down. For the first time since the kitchen, I felt something like grief rise cleanly through the anger. Not for the money. Money can be rebuilt. I knew that better than anyone. What hurt was the shape of the years behind it. The way I had made myself useful in secret to preserve the peace of people who would never have done the same for me. The way I had mistaken endurance for love. At 10:30, Lila showed up with coffee and almond croissants. She texted from downstairs first. I'm outside. Open the front door, or I'll charm your building into letting me up. And 10 minutes later, she was standing in my living room, in boots and a wool coat, her hair twisted into a loose knot, eyes scanning my face the way women do when they love you enough to check for damage before making a joke. You look like hell, she said. Thank you. You're welcome. Then she put the coffee on the counter and hugged me so hard I almost cried, which annoyed me immediately because I had been doing so well. Lila had always been the cousin most likely to say what everyone else only admitted privately. She was 2 years older than me, worked in event logistics, and had the kind of practical, unsentimental loyalty that makes people assume she is tougher than she actually is. She had also spent enough holidays watching my family to understand the ecosystem better than most. When we sat at the counter with coffee between us, she said, I am going to ask one question, and I need you to answer it honestly. Fine. Did you actually pay her bills? Yes. How much? I told her. She just stared. Then she said very softly, that evil little idiot. I should not have laughed. I did. Lila shook her head slowly. I knew something was off. I didn't know it was that off. What made you think something was off? She was too smug, Lila said. People who are actually secure don't perform it that hard. And every time money came up, she'd do that thing where she'd get breezy instead of specific. Abundance, energy, timing. It was all nonsense. I smiled into my coffee. Then her face hardened. What she said to you last night was unforgivable. That landed harder than I expected because nobody in my immediate family would ever use a word that final. They preferred smoother terms, unfortunate, tense, miscommunication, hurtful on both sides, anything to avoid moral clarity. I said, Mom called this morning. Lila groaned. Let me guess. If Vivian is the real victim because consequences are stressful. More or less. And Uncle Martin, haven't spoken to him. Give it time, she said dryly. He'll come in with a lecture about family and sacrifice while having sacrificed absolutely nothing. She wasn't wrong. We ate half the croissants, and I finally told someone the full version. Not just the money, but the pattern. The first midnight call, the private promises, the way Vivian weaponized shame, the way I kept telling myself I was preventing something bigger, the file I had built, the exact moment in the kitchen when I realized nobody in that room trusted me enough to hesitate before believing her. Lila listened without interrupting. Once or twice she muttered unbelievable, But mostly she just let me empty it out. When I finished, she said, "That you know what the worst part is? I have options." She didn't even respect you enough to keep the lie contained. She could have just gone on taking your money quietly forever. But no, she had to humiliate you too. There it was. Exactly. I set my cup down. That's the part I can't get past. Don't, Lila said. Don't get past it too fast. People like that survive because everyone around them rushes to make them comfortable again. I looked at her. She held my gaze and said, "You are not required to shorten your anger just because it makes the rest of the family nervous." I had needed to hear that more than I realized. After she left, the day began to turn. First came a message from Tessa. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Thank you for trying to help me anyway." Then one from Aunt Marina, which was almost comical in its carefulness. "And I understand there may have been some tension yesterday. Just know we love you both." Both, of course. Then around 2 in the afternoon came the real shift. My younger cousin Eli texted me, "Is it true you were paying Vivian's debts?" I stared at the screen. A minute later, another text from Tessa this time. "Lila told me not to say anything, but apparently Uncle Ray knows." And then, as if the whole thing had crossed some invisible threshold, my phone began to light up in intervals. Not constant, not chaotic. Worse, in a way, controlled curiosity. Family members trying to sound compassionate while gathering data. "Aunt Marina, I feel awful if there's more to the story than we understood." Uncle Ray, "Kiddo, call me if you need anything." Eli, "She really said that while you were covering her?" Tessa, "I am genuinely sick over this." As I sat very still and realized what had happened. The truth had left the house, not because I sent it, because a family can ignore a scapegoat's pain. It cannot resist scandal once the hierarchy starts wobbling. I did not answer most of them. At 3:15, my father finally called. I let it go to voicemail. He called again, then sent a text. "This needs to stop spreading." I looked at that sentence and felt something cold move through me. Not "this is wrong," not "I'm sorry," not "I should have handled it differently." This needs to stop spreading, meaning the problem was not the lie, not the exploitation, not the years of hidden dependence. The problem was reputational drift. I typed back, "Then perhaps it should not have started in your kitchen." He called immediately. Against my better judgment, I answered. His voice came in already strained. "Honey, why are other people hearing about this from outside the family?" I laughed softly. "Outside the family? They were in the room. You know what I mean?" "Yes," I said. "I do. You mean, why are people discussing a thing that became public when Vivian accused me of begging her for money in front of witnesses? She was upset. That's your defense?" "No," he snapped. "My point is that there was no reason for this to become a circus." I stood and walked to the window. Afternoon had gone silver and thin over the buildings. "Then you should have stopped it when it was still a lie." He said my name the way fathers do when they want the authority of childhood back in the room. "Enough." "No," I said. "Actually, not enough. That's been the problem." He fell silent, and I could almost hear him recalibrating. My father was not a stupid man. That he was just one of those men who had built an identity around being decent without ever doing the unpleasant work decency requires. Finally, he said, "Your mother told me the amount." Then she listened better than she usually does. "This isn't funny." "It isn't." Another pause, then quieter. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question was sincere enough to hurt. I answered with the truth. "Because I knew you'd make it about keeping the peace." He breathed out slowly. "That's not fair." "It is. I would have helped." "No," I said. "You would have mediated. You would have asked me to be patient. You would have told her to be more honest and me to be more understanding. And then 6 weeks later, I'd still be paying." His silence told me I was right. That was the thing about my father. Under enough direct light, that he often knew exactly what he had failed to do. He just never reached that point in time to be useful. "She says she's going to pay you back," he said at last. I closed my eyes. "That would be a lovely surprise." "Nora." "What?" "She's your sister." I turned from the window and leaned both palms on the sill. "Do you know what I keep hearing from all of you?" He didn't answer. "You say she's my sister like that erases what she did. Like the relationship matters only in one direction. Like being family means I owe her endless tolerance, but she owes me nothing except apologies after exposure." "That's not what I'm saying." "It is exactly what you're saying." He was quiet for a long moment, then, "What do you want from us?" The old me would have answered with something small: acknowledgement, respect, an apology, basic fairness. The new answer arrived before I had time to soften it. I want you to stop asking me to make this easier for the person who did it. He had nothing to say to that. We ended the call without resolution. By evening, I understood something important. The family was splitting, not into heroes and villains, but into instincts. One group wanted containment, my parents mostly, plus a few older relatives who believed appearances deserved at least as much protection as truth. The other group wanted correction, not blood exactly, but consequence. Lila, Tessa, Eli. Even Aunt Marina, under all her softness, had enough moral discomfort to start sounding less diplomatic in her follow ups. And somewhere in the middle was Colin, dealing with the practical wreckage of a lie that had clearly spread far beyond one credit card. And at 6:42, he emailed again. I need the full file. I'm not asking for drama. I'm asking because she's still minimizing and I need to know what I'm actually working with. I read it twice. Then I opened the longer PDF. For a moment, I hesitated, not because I wanted to protect Vivian, because once truth reaches a certain level of detail, it stops being deniable. It stops being family conflict and becomes evidence. Then I remembered her voice in the kitchen. Stop circling me for money. I attached the file, sent it. 10 minutes later, he replied with only 3 words. Received. Thank you. That night, for the first time since Thanksgiving, I cooked myself an actual dinner instead of surviving on coffee and adrenaline. Salmon, rice, roasted asparagus. Simple, clean. Food that required enough attention to keep me in my body. Halfway through eating, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I knew by heart. Vivian, not a call this time, a text. Can I come over tomorrow? I stared at it, then another, please. I need to talk to you face to face. A third. He has all of it now. I set the phone down. The salmon had gone lukewarm. The apartment smelled faintly of lemon and olive oil. On the television, muted, a home renovation show was flipping through impossible kitchens owned by people who said things like, we just want this space to feel us. For a long minute, I did nothing. Then I picked the phone back up and typed, tomorrow, 10 a.m., 1 hour. That's all. She replied instantly. Thank you. I did not answer again. I cleaned the kitchen, ran the dishwasher, laid out clothes for the next morning. Erin sat on the couch with a blanket over my legs while the city dimmed outside the windows. I should have felt dread. I did a little. But underneath it was something steadier. Preparation. Because I already knew how she would come. Not angry first, tearful first, contrite enough to regain access, humble enough to make refusal feel cruel, careful not to push too fast. She would try apology, then panic, then sisterhood, then memory, then guilt. If one failed, she would move to the next. People think manipulation is chaotic. The best kind is structured. I knew her structure now, and that changed everything. At 9:30, Lila texted, are you seriously meeting with her alone? Yes. Want me nearby? I considered it, then typed back, no. But keep your phone on. Always, she replied. I got ready for bed slowly, brushed my teeth, washed my face. I checked the locks, even though I always did. The apartment was quiet except for the dishwasher swishing in the kitchen and the occasional burst of traffic from below. When I slid into bed, I thought about the years before this week. The strange half-life of being the capable daughter in a family that rewarded charm over discipline and performance over honesty. I thought about all the times I had mistaken invisibility for safety. All the times I had let silence pass for maturity when really it was just fear trained into elegance. Then I thought about tomorrow, about the way Vivian would stand in my living room, stripped of audience and staging, forced for once to speak in a room where her status symbols meant nothing and the numbers belonged to me. For the first time since the kitchen, I smiled. Not because I was happy, or because I finally understood the asymmetry. All these years, my sister had believed that power belonged to the person with the prettier life. She was about to find out what it actually belongs to. I turned off the lamp and let the room go dark. At 9:58 the next morning, a black SUV pulled up outside my building. And when I saw who climbed out of it, I knew immediately that my sister was not the only one coming to ask for mercy. It was my sister and my mother. Of course it was. For one irrational second, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so completely predictable. Vivian had not come alone because she had never really done anything alone when there was a chance she could bring a witness, a buffer, or a translator for her own feelings. Instead, my mother had come because she still believed every family crisis was something she could manage if she controlled the room quickly enough. I stood behind the living room window for a moment and watched them get out of the SUV. Vivian looked wrecked, not ruined, not transformed, just worn thin. No makeup except what looked like leftover mascara under her eyes, hair pulled back badly, as if she'd redone it twice in the car and given up the third time. She wore a black puffer coat and leggings and carried a leather tote that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, which annoyed me on principle. My mother looked exactly as mothers like mine always look when they are on their way to a family confrontation they did not cause but fully intend to dominate. Camel coat, lipstick, composed face, anger disguised as concern. She stepped out of the passenger side already holding herself like the aggrieved party. I checked the time, 9:59, then I opened the downstairs entrance remotely and waited by my apartment door with my arms folded. The elevator dinged at exactly 10:01. My mother walked out first. That told me everything. Vivian followed behind her, shoulders tight, eyes already glassy. For a split second, seeing her like that stirred an old reflex in me. Sympathy, protective instinct, the worn groove of being the one who steadied the room while she unraveled. Then I remembered the kitchen, the lie, the years, the reflex passed. I opened the apartment door before either of them could knock. My mother started immediately. I came because this. No, I said. She asked to come. You invited yourself. Her mouth tightened. I stepped back anyway, because I had no desire to have this conversation in the hallway. They came in. My mother paused just past the threshold and did the subtle visual scan people do when they have underestimated your life for years and are temporarily forced to register that your home is not in fact sad. Clean oak floors, soft gray sofa, bookshelves built into the wall, brass floor lamp, large windows, real art, everything intentional, nothing showy. It looked like what it was, a home purchased and maintained by someone competent. Vivian noticed the same thing, though she had been here before. Only now, without the superiority of her usual mood, the place seemed to bother her in a different way, not because it was small, because it was peaceful. I gestured to the living room chairs, but remained standing myself. You have an hour, I said. As my mother turned sharply. Nora, this attitude is unnecessary. Then leave. She blinked. Vivian gave a broken little whisper. Mom, please. There it was, the first crack in the arrangement. Vivian did not actually want my mother steering this. She wanted her nearby, but not leading. Because even in crisis, she understood that too much maternal management would make her look childish. Good. I said, you can both sit or you can both go. They sat. I remained standing beside the armchair across from them, one hand resting lightly on the back. I had no intention of making them comfortable enough to mistake this for reconciliation. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Vivian looked up at me and said, I'm sorry. Not dramatic, not polished. Just immediate and raw enough that I knew she had rehearsed stripping the opening down to essentials. I did not answer. She swallowed. What I said at Thanksgiving was cruel and false and disgusting, and I know that. Still, I said nothing. My mother jumped in too soon, unable to help herself. She's been beside herself since that night. I looked at her. That is not the sentence I'm most interested in. Vivian closed her eyes briefly, embarrassed, maybe even angry at her. Good again. Then she tried once more. I lied, she said, about you in front of everyone, and I did it because I was trying to protect myself, and it was ugly and cowardly, and I know that. That was better. Not enough, but better. I moved finally and sat in the armchair opposite them, crossing one leg over the other. Go on, her face flickered. She had expected tears by now, or at least some visible softening she could work with. Instead, I was giving her the same expression I would give someone presenting weak numbers in a meeting. She pressed her lips together. Colin has the full file. Yes. He went through everything. Yes. He knows about the cards, the line of credit, the insurance, the transfers. Yes. Each yes hit her like a small slap. My mother cut in again. He didn't need every detail. I turned to her. Are you under the impression this meeting is for your comfort? Nora, no, listen carefully. My voice stayed quiet, which always made my mother more unsettled than volume would have. I spent nearly 3 years protecting your daughter from the consequences of her own choices while she insulted me in public and lied about me in private. Yet you do not get to come into my home and negotiate the format in which reality reached her husband. She stared at me. For the first time in my life, I watched my mother realize that one of her daughters had stopped being governable. It unsettled her more than the debt. Vivian started crying then. Real tears this time, not dainty, not decorative. Her nose reddened, her breath caught. She pressed fingers to her mouth and tried to regain control. I know I don't get to ask for anything, she said shakily. I know that, but this is catastrophic. I looked at her without blinking. For whom? She lowered her hand. For my marriage. For my kids. For everything. No, I said. For your image. Your marriage was already sitting on a lie. Your children were already being raised inside one. Everything was already unstable. You just preferred that I stand underneath the weak beams. My mother inhaled sharply. You're being vicious. No, I said again. I'm being exact. Vivian shook her head hard. Please don't do that. Please don't talk like I'm some monster. I know I was horrible, okay? I know it. I was ashamed and scared, and every time you helped me, it bought me one more month to figure it out. And then I kept not figuring it out. There was truth in that. Enough truth, at least, that I did not interrupt. She leaned forward, crying more openly now. And what I said at Thanksgiving, I don't even know why I said it like that. I was drinking and I was already tense because you'd started pushing me to tell Colin the truth. And when Tessa asked for help and you started talking, I just felt. She stopped. Felt what? I asked. She looked at me through tears. Small. That word landed, because there it was, the ugliest part finally spoken aloud. Not desperate, not panicked, threatened. She had humiliated me because my competence made her feel smaller in the one room where she could not tolerate it. I nodded once. That's the first honest thing you've said to me in years. My mother turned toward her, alarm flickering across her face. Vivian. But Vivian kept talking. Maybe because she could feel the opening and knew better than to waste it. You always make me feel like a failure, she whispered. I almost smiled, not because it was amusing, because some truths arrive wearing the exact wrong accusation. I make you feel observed, I said. There's a difference. She stared at me. You built a lifestyle you couldn't afford, I continued. Yet you lied to your husband, you borrowed against your future, you used me as a private line of support. Then you called me a beggar in front of our family because being near someone who actually understood your finances made you feel exposed. That is not me making you feel like a failure. That is you feeling the outline of your own behavior. My mother stood up. This is not helping. I looked at her. Sit down. She went very still. Then, unbelievably, she sat. That was the moment I understood the balance of the room had fully shifted. Not emotionally, structurally. My mother had spent decades controlling family conversations by timing, interruption, disapproval, and sheer force of expectation. And here in my apartment, none of it was working. The old levers reached for air and found nothing. Vivian wiped at her face. Oh, Colin wants me to sell the SUV. I said nothing. He's taking over all the accounts. Nothing. He canceled the December trip. Nothing. He said if there's one more surprise, one more anything he doesn't know about, he's done. Still nothing. Her voice sharpened with panic. Do you understand what that means? Yes, I said. It means the era of consequences has begun. She flinched. My mother burst out. For God's sake, Nora, must you speak like that? She is still your sister. I looked at her with a tiredness so deep it almost felt ancient. And I was still her sister when she let me cover $39,000 of her mess while telling everyone I was the unstable one. My mother opened her mouth. I held up one hand. She stopped. Do you know, I said, not taking my eyes off her, what I keep noticing? That not once since you got here have you asked how I am. Silence. That one hit. Because it was true. They had come to manage fallout, not damage. To contain the consequences of Vivian's collapse, not to measure the cost of mine. My mother sank back a fraction. Nora, no, say it correctly. She frowned. What? Say what happened correctly. Her face changed. She knew this was a trap, but unlike most of the traps in our family, it was one built entirely out of truth. And truth is hard to sidestep once someone forces you to use nouns. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. I leaned forward slightly. Say it. Vivian looked between us, frightened now, not of Colin or debt or lost vacations, but of this, the stripping away of family language that made everything survivable by making nothing precise. My mother's jaw tightened. She said something cruel. No. She lied. Better. My mother stopped. She hated this, hated being dragged into accuracy. She lied about you, in front of the family. I waited, and she added stiffly, "You had been helping her financially." I did not look away. "How much?" She swallowed. $39,000. Over what period? Almost 3 years. I held the silence until it turned unbearable. Then I asked the only question that mattered. And when she said I was begging her for money, what should you have done? My mother's face flushed. Vivian whispered, "Mom." But I was not done. "What should you have done?" She looked at the floor, then at me, then away again. "I should have stopped her," she said quietly. "Yes?" I should have asked what was really going on. Yes. And I should have believed that there might be more to it before I took her side. There it was, late, dragged out, bitterly insufficient, but true. I sat back. Vivienne was crying openly again now, but more softly. Not the crying of someone performing distress, the crying of someone watching the family architecture tilt in a direction she had never prepared for. And because no reckoning in my family could ever remain still for long, that was when the doorbell rang. All three of us looked toward it. I frowned. I was not expecting anyone. Then my phone buzzed. "Lila, you are not going to believe who just got out of another car. Check your door, of course." I closed my eyes for 1 second, then stood and walked to the door. Through the peephole, I saw Lila. And behind her, in the hallway, stood my father and Colin. I actually laughed then, a short, disbelieving sound, because apparently every person involved in the implosion of my sister's life had decided my apartment was now the natural site of accountability. I opened the door. Lila took one look at my face and said, "I brought backup." I moved aside. That was not necessary, but I appreciate the instinct. She stepped in, saw my mother and Vivian on the sofa, and immediately understood the temperature of the room. Her expression shifted into the kind of politeness that is really just excellent aim. Behind her, my father entered slowly, looking profoundly uncomfortable. Colin came last, closing the door quietly behind him. He looked worse than Vivian, not emotionally louder, more emptied out. It had the particular look of a man who has spent 48 hours reviewing evidence and realizing he has been living in a set. My mother stood up at once. "What are you doing here?" my father answered before anyone else could, trying to stop this from becoming even worse. Lila muttered, "A little late for the opening shift," and moved toward the kitchen. I almost smiled. Colin remained near the door for a moment, gaze moving from Vivian's tear-streaked face to me, then to the documents stacked on my side table. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said. "It's already crowded," I replied. That was permission enough. He stepped farther in, and then, because fate occasionally has a sense of timing cruel enough to feel personal, everyone began speaking at once. My mother demanding to know who had invited whom. My father telling her to calm down, which naturally made her less calm. Vivian half standing, saying Colin shouldn't be here like she had any standing left to govern the guest list. Lila unscrewing a bottle of sparkling water in my kitchen, with the calm of a medic entering a battlefield. I raised my voice exactly once. "Enough." The room went still, not because I was loud, because nobody expected me to take the floor and keep it. I stood near the coffee table and looked at each of them in turn. Mother, father, Vivian, Colin. Lila leaning against the counter, arms folded, eyes watchful. "This is what is going to happen," I said. "No one is going to yell in my home. No one is going to rewrite events. No one is going to ask me to make this easier so they can all feel better by dinner." My father started. "Nora, no." I looked directly at him. "What? You had your chance to lead when it mattered. You are here now as a witness." His face changed, hurt, deserved. Then I turned to Colin. "You asked for the full file, you got it. Are there any questions of fact?" He answered immediately, "No." That mattered more than anything else in the room, because once the person with the most to lose confirms the facts, the rest of the family loses its favorite refuge, which is ambiguity. My mother looked at him, almost pleading. "Colin, surely there are context issues." He cut her off, calmly. "No, Claire, there are not." Vivian flinched as if he had struck her. He did not raise his voice. That made him more dangerous. "I have reviewed every transfer," he said. "Every message Nora sent me, every screenshot, every promise, every request for secrecy. That there are no context issues that change the facts. Vivian concealed substantial debt. Nora covered it repeatedly. Then Vivian publicly accused Nora of doing the opposite." The room held still around that. My mother sat down very slowly. My father rubbed a hand over his mouth. Vivian whispered, "Colin." He looked at her then, and I watched the last of his protective confusion leave his face. "No, you don't get to interrupt the summary." Lila, from the kitchen, murmured, "Finally." I should not have appreciated that as much as I did. Then Colin did something I had not expected. He turned to me and said, in front of all of them, "You did not deserve any of this." My throat tightened. I nodded once, nothing more. Anything more would have broken something open that I needed closed. He continued, now addressing the room at large. What she did for our family was generous. What we did in return, what my wife did in return, and what the rest of you enabled by believing the ugliest version first was shameful. My mother looked like she had swallowed glass. My father said quietly, "That's not fair." Colin met his eyes. "No. Fair would have been someone stopping it before she had to." Silence again. Then Vivian stood abruptly, tears and anger finally merging into something less passive. "So that's it? Everyone just gets to stand here and judge me?" Lila laughed once, genuinely startled. "You stood in a kitchen and called the woman paying your bills a beggar." Vivian turned on her. "Stay out of it?" "No," Lila said. "I'm actually getting into it. Sure, because some of us are tired of watching this family treat Nora like she's the designated absorbent material for everybody else's dysfunction." I would have stopped her if she were wrong. She wasn't. Vivian's face crumpled again. "I said I was sorry." I looked at her. "You said you were sorry after exposure. Those are not the same thing." She stared at me, desperate now, stripped of every easier angle. "What do you want from me?" There it was, the question everyone asks when what they really want is the minimum price of absolution. I answered without hesitation. "I want you to stop asking that like there is a single sentence or payment or tearful visit that repairs this." She went still. "I want you to understand," I said, "that the worst part is not even the money. It's that you took the place where I was most loyal to you and turned it into a weapon when you needed to look bigger. You did not just use me, you revised me." Nobody in the room moved. I kept going because for once, nobody was interrupting. "You let the family believe I was unstable, unsophisticated, behind, lonely, small, and difficult. You let them call me cold when I was keeping your secrets. You let them admire your life while I helped finance it. And when I came close enough to your shame that you could feel it, you shoved me under the story instead of telling the truth." Vivian sank back onto the sofa as if her knees had given out. "And you," I said, turning to my parents, "helped, not with the debt, with the narrative every time you dismissed me as harsh and praised her as effortless. Yes, every time you treated my caution like a flaw and her performance like success. You built the room she stood in when she lied." My mother started crying then, quietly, shocked, offended tears, as though truth in full sentences was somehow indecent. I looked at her and felt almost nothing. That surprised me most of all. My father sat with both elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Old men look older when their self-concept cracks. He seemed suddenly shrunken, not in body but in certainty. Lila remained in the kitchen doorway, still as a guardrail. Colin stood near the door, one hand in his pocket, gaze distant. He was already in aftermath, mentally. Budgets, lawyers maybe, counseling, school tuition, asset sales, the administrative skeleton of a marriage in triage. And I, sitting in my own living room, with all of them finally forced to stand inside the truth, felt something I had not felt since childhood. Space. Vivian wiped her face again and said in a hoarse whisper, "I can pay you back." I nodded once. "Yes, you can. I mean all of it, over time. I'll do it." "I expect you to." She stared. "That's all?" I almost smiled. "No," I said. "That is not all. It is simply the part that involves numbers." And then I stood. The movement startled all of them because it meant the meeting was ending, and endings without emotional cleanup make families like mine itch. "You should all go," I said. My mother looked up sharply. "Nora, no." My father rose slowly. "We're not finished." "Yes," I said. "We are. You may have more feelings, you may have more explanations. That you may have a sudden appetite for therapy or mediation or family dinners where everybody says healing 5 times over dry chicken. That is your business. But this part is over." Vivian stood too, shakily. "Can I call you?" "About repayment logistics, eventually. Not about guilt." Her face twisted. Colin gave one small nod, like a man acknowledging terms he knows are fair, even if he hates the need for them. Lila moved to the door and opened it before anyone could argue. That helped. My mother passed me with the expression of someone who had not yet decided whether she had been corrected or humiliated. My father paused as if he wanted to say something paternal and clean and redeeming, but nothing honest arrived in time. Colin left in silence. Vivian was last. At the threshold, she turned back. For a moment, she looked younger. Yet not innocent, just less polished, less defended. I did love you, she said, even while I was doing all of this. I believed her. That was the tragedy. I believed that in the crooked, hungry, self protective way she was capable of loving me, she had loved me the whole time. And it had still looked like this. So I answered with the only truth that mattered. That was never the same as treating me well. Then I closed the door. The apartment went silent, utterly silent. I stood there with one hand still on the knob and let the quiet settle into my bones. Behind me, Lila exhaled. Well, I laughed then, really laughed. Brief, stunned, a little wild around the edges. She came over and handed me a glass of water like I had just completed some athletic event. Drink this before you dissociate into the furniture. I took it. Yet my hand trembled only once. When I turned back toward the living room, the sofa cushion still held the shape of where my family had been sitting, as if the room itself had documented the scene. A tissue lay crumpled on the coffee table. My mother's perfume lingered faintly in the air, floral and expensive and suffocating. Outside, a siren passed and faded. A truck backed up somewhere below, with 3 soft beeps. The city had resumed, indifferent and steady. Lila sat on the arm of the sofa and looked at me carefully. How do you feel? I thought about it. Raw, yes. Tired, angry, sad in places I could not yet name. But underneath all of that was something else. Like I stopped carrying something, I said. She nodded. Good. I looked toward the window where pale afternoon light was beginning to slide across the floor. Do you know what's strange? What? I thought exposing the truth would feel vindictive. And it doesn't. I took a sip of water. It feels late. Lila smiled, and this time there was no humor in it, just recognition. Yeah, she said. That's usually how justice feels in families like ours. She left an hour later, after making me promise I would eat and after texting Tessa that I was alive and no one had thrown a vase. When the apartment was mine again, I sat alone on the sofa and looked at my phone. 3 new emails, one from Colin with the subject line, repayment structure, one from my father with no subject line at all, and one from Vivian. The preview read only, I don't know if there's a right way to begin this, but I'm going to try. I did not open any of them yet. I set the phone face down on the coffee table, leaned back, and closed my eyes. The trap had not been elaborate. That was the thing. No private investigator, no secret recording, no dramatic public slideshow, no brilliant master plan. Just gravity, finally allowed to work. And somewhere in the middle of that exhausted, echoing quiet, I realized the family story had not actually ended in my living room. It had only stopped belonging to them. I left the emails unopened until the next morning. Not to be dramatic, not to punish anyone, just because I had finally learned the difference between urgency and access, and none of them had earned immediate access to me anymore. That night, I made pasta with browned butter and black pepper because it was the kind of dinner that required enough attention to keep my hands busy without pretending I wasn't exhausted. I folded the throw blanket at the end of the couch instead of leaving it where it had fallen. I ran the dishwasher. I watered the 2 plants by the windows that always drooped if I ignored them for more than 3 days. Small acts, ordinary acts, the kind that remind you your life is still your life, even after a room full of people tries to drag you back into the version of yourself they preferred. When I finally went to bed, I slept hard. No vivid dreams, no rehearsed arguments, no waking at 3 in the morning with a sentence in my throat. Just sleep, deep and blank and clean. I woke before my alarm to a pale stripe of light across the bedroom wall and lay there for a minute listening to the city outside. A truck changing gears, someone's door slamming in the alley, the low hum of a bus braking at the corner. It was December now, the kind of cold that made the windows feel thin even when they weren't. My phone was on the nightstand, face down where I'd left it. I rolled over, picked it up, and opened the messages one by one. Collins was first. It was concise, which I appreciated. Nora, I've spoken with our financial advisor and attorney. I am not asking you to do anything immediately, but I want you to know I intend to ensure you are repaid in full. Vivienne will be working. We are liquidating non essential assets and restructuring everything. I understand this does not undo what happened. I only want you to know I am taking the debt and the deception seriously. Thank you for documenting everything. I'm sorry again. I read it twice. It was not warm. It was not pleading. It was not trying to make me soothe him. It was practical, ashamed, and direct. That mattered. But my father's email was longer and somehow said less. He wrote about family, about disappointment, about how things had gotten out of hand, about how he wished I had trusted him sooner, about how no one had meant for it to go this far. That phrase sat there in the middle of the email, like it had been set down by someone who still believed escalation was a weather event no one could predict. No one had meant for it to go this far, as if the problem had been distance, not direction. I read it to the end, then archived it without replying. My mother had not emailed at all. That told me more than an apology probably would have. Then I opened Vivian's. I don't know if there's a right way to begin this, but I'm going to try. I'm ashamed of myself. I know I've said that already. But I need to say it again because I don't think I understood the full size of what I did until I saw everything together in one file and then watched you say it out loud in front of all of us without raising your voice once. I kept thinking of myself as desperate, but desperation doesn't explain cruelty. It doesn't explain why I needed to make you smaller in order to feel less exposed. I don't have a good answer for that except envy, shame, and the fact that I got used to you being the one person I could use without losing access to you. I hate writing that, but it's true. I stopped there, not because I needed a break, because that sentence knocked the air out of me. The one person I could use without losing access to you. That was it. Not the whole truth, but the central one. I kept reading. And she wrote that Colin had taken over every account, canceled cards, sold the SUV listing to a dealer they knew, and moved the family onto a strict budget. She wrote that she had started interviewing for retail and administrative jobs, that she had already boxed up bags and jewelry to consign, that she had told the children they weren't taking the holiday trip because mom made mistakes with money. She wrote that she was starting therapy. She wrote that she knew none of it bought her forgiveness, but she was done pretending she was confused about why this happened. At the end, she wrote, I know you may never trust me again. I don't know if I deserve for you to, but I am going to pay you back every month until it is done, even if it takes years. Not because I think it fixes us, because it's mine. That line I believed. As I closed the email and stared at the kitchen wall for a long time, then I made coffee. The weeks after that did not become easy. That is one of the lies people tell about setting boundaries. That once you finally do it, relief arrives and stays in a tidy shape. It doesn't. Relief comes in flashes, then grief, then anger again, then fatigue, then a strange free floating guilt that does not mean you were wrong, only that your nervous system was trained to mistake self protection for betrayal. I went back to work on Monday and discovered something almost offensive in its normalcy. My inbox still needed answers. A portfolio review still needed edits. A director from Chicago still used too many words for simple concerns. The market had moved while my family imploded, and no one on my team had paused to care. It was wonderful. But for 8 hours a day, I got to exist in a place where facts mattered, documentation mattered, and a well constructed argument could actually change the outcome of something. I had never been more grateful for spreadsheets in my life. At lunch on Tuesday, I sat alone in the small park behind the office tower and ate a salad that tasted mostly like refrigeration while watching people hurry past in coats and boots. Cold wind moved through the bare branches overhead. My phone buzzed once with a message from my mother. Thinking of you, that was it. No apology, no acknowledgement, just an emotional tap on the glass, as if the right to enter still existed. I locked the screen and put the phone back in my bag. Lila called that night and asked, are we in the ghosting phase or the administrative contact phase? Administrative? For now. Excellent. That's my favorite kind of family. I smiled into the phone. Mine too. Tessa texted 2 days later asking if the offer about student loan consolidation still stood. The old version of me might have hesitated, worried that helping anyone in the family again would make me look foolish or weak or available in the wrong way. The new version understood something simpler. Helping is not the problem. Helping people who use your help against you is the problem. So I wrote back, yes, Saturday afternoon. She replied immediately with about 8 grateful messages and one crying emoji she later apologized for. Saturday, she came over with a laptop, 3 lender statements, and the stunned expression of someone who had spent 6 months being scared of numbers because nobody had ever translated them into steps. Well, we sat at my dining table for 3 hours. I showed her how to compare interest rates, how to identify which servicers were just offering cosmetic relief and which were actually giving structural improvement, how to calculate the real cost of stretching out a loan versus attacking the higher balances first. I explained the difference between panic and planning. I made her a simple spreadsheet with color-coded options and checkboxes because some people need numbers to look less like threat and more like shape. Halfway through, she looked at me and said, "I can't believe nobody ever told me this stuff." I almost said, "They didn't tell me either." I had to learn it because no one was coming. Instead, I said, "Most people aren't taught, they're just judged." She got very quiet after that. Before she left, she hugged me and said, "No, for what it's worth, I think they all know now." "Know what?" "That they were wrong about you." I smile a little. "That's for them to live with." By Christmas, the family had reorganized around the fallout the way families always do. Not truthfully, functionally. My mother attempted 2 separate reconciliation dinners by text, both of which I declined with such steady politeness that she could find no phrasing dramatic enough to challenge without exposing herself. My father called once, left a voicemail, and sounded older than he had a month earlier. Aunt Marina sent fudge. Uncle Ray sent an article about budgeting that would have been insulting if it weren't so unintentionally stupid. Lila came over with wine and insisted on helping me put up a small tree, even though I had not intended to decorate at all. Trauma needs lighting," she declared, untangling a strand of warm white bulbs from a knot that looked impossible until it wasn't. On Christmas Eve, I went to my parents' house for exactly 2 hours. That had been my condition. I drove separately. I brought nothing that needed serving or reheating. I wore a dark green sweater, gold hoops, and the expression of a woman attending an event she had fully priced. The house looked the same, garland on the staircase, candles in the foyer. My mother's good serving platters laid out like polished diplomacy, but the emotional architecture had changed. People stood differently around me. That was the first thing I noticed, not warmer exactly. More careful, more aware that I was not going to absorb casual disrespect just to keep the evening smooth. Vivian was there already, and helping one of the kids with a toy that had too many tiny pieces. She looked thinner, tired, less lacquered. She wore black slacks and a cream sweater with no obvious label, and for the first time in years, she looked like a person instead of a campaign for her own desirability. When she saw me, she stood, not rushed, not dramatic, just stood. "Hi," she said. "Hi." That was all. No hug, no scene. My mother, of course, tried to overcompensate by being unnaturally warm, which only made the air around her feel desperate. My father brought me a drink without asking what I wanted, but at least he remembered sparkling water with lime. Colin nodded at me from across the room, a nod with weight inside it. Tessa hugged me properly. Lila arrived 20 minutes later, surveyed the room like a bodyguard in boots. Hagen positioned herself near the cheese plate where she could monitor everybody's nonsense. Dinner was awkward, not explosively, just honestly. The older generation kept drifting toward weather, recipes, and neighborhood gossip. The younger cousins kept finding ways to include me in conversations they used to let slide around me. My mother corrected Vivian once over something minor and then looked startled at herself, as if she had forgotten that accountability could travel in more than one direction. At one point, I passed the kitchen and heard my parents arguing in low voices. Not a dramatic fight, a tired one. My mother saying, "You never step in until it's too late." My father replying, "And you always think managing it is the same as fixing it." I kept walking. That was their marriage, not my assignment. Before I left, Colin caught me near the front hall. He was holding 2 dessert plates he had clearly been sent to carry by someone needing a task. "Can I say one thing?" "You just did." He almost smiled. "Fair." I waited. He glanced toward the dining room, lowered his voice, and said, "She started the job this week." I knew exactly who he meant. "Okay." "She hates it." I took my coat from the hook by the door. "That seems irrelevant." He nodded. "Probably. I just wanted you to know it's real." I looked at him for a long second. He was tired too, but unlike my parents, he no longer looked like a man trying to keep the room comfortable. He looked like a man inventorying damage and accepting the cost of repair. So I said, "Good." and then I left. Outside, the air was sharp enough to sting the inside of my nose. The frost silvered the edges of the hedges by the walkway. I sat in my car for a moment with the heater running low and looked back at the house where I had spent so many holidays feeling edited. The windows glowed gold against the dark. For years, I had thought peace in that family meant staying palatable. Now I understood peace was something else entirely. Distance with clarity. 6 months later, on a Thursday in June, the first repayment hit my account. $500. The transfer notification appeared on my phone while I was in line at a coffee shop waiting for an oat milk latte I was already regretting ordering. I stepped aside, opened the app, and saw the memo line. First payment, that was all. No apology attached, no emotional bait, no request for acknowledgement hidden inside logistics, just a transfer. As I stood there with the smell of espresso and burnt sugar in the air and the cold rush of the cafe's air conditioning moving across my arms, and I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not softness, respect, maybe. A reluctant beginning of it, not for who she had been, for the fact that she was finally attaching consequences to the right person. I sent back one message. Received. Thank you. She did not reply. The payments continued, not always on the same date, but every month. 500, then 500 again. Once 700, with no explanation. By the end of the year, she had repaid enough that the money itself had stopped being abstract, not enough to restore trust, enough to establish pattern. And pattern, I had learned, mattered more than speeches. My relationship with my parents changed too, though not cleanly, as my mother never gave the kind of apology I would have written for myself. She did what women like her often do when shame arrives late in life. She became attentive in practical ways and hoped the attention would function as retroactive innocence. She asked more direct questions, interrupted me less, stopped making small little digs about my apartment, my job, my intensity. It was not redemption, it was adaptation. My father tried harder in a way that pained me more. He started calling just to ask about work, sending articles actually related to finance, though usually a week after I'd already seen them. Once he mailed me a clipping from the business section with a note that said, "Thought you'd enjoy this." That it was so transparently paternal and so belatedly respectful that I had to sit at my kitchen table for 5 full minutes before deciding whether to laugh or cry. In the end, I did neither. I put the clipping in a drawer. Some things are too sad for either reaction. The most surprising shift came from inside me. I had expected anger to be the dominant legacy of what happened. Maybe bitterness, maybe a sharpened suspicion I would have to spend years sanding down. Instead, what grew in their place was standards. That was all. Simple, expensive standards. I no longer rushed to answer family calls just because they rang. I no longer explained my career in smaller words to make other people less insecure. I no longer volunteered to solve crises for adults who confused my competence with infinite emotional availability. I did not stop being generous. I stopped being accessible by default. That was a bigger change than any of them fully understood. A year after Thanksgiving, Tessa and I sat in the same coffee shop where the first repayment had appeared, and she told me she had refinanced 2 loans, taken a better position with a nonprofit hospital system, and was finally saving money every month. "You know what the best part is?" she asked. "What?" "I don't feel ashamed anymore. I just feel responsible." I smiled. "That's a much more useful emotion." She laughed. "You should put that on a mug." Maybe I should have. Instead, I went home that afternoon, opened my investment accounts, and moved the amount I used to send Vivian every month into a separate long-term fund. The numbers had changed beautifully. Without her financial sinkhole attached to my income, my savings accelerated, my portfolio grew faster, my options widened. I replaced the old sofa, took the trip to Montreal I had postponed twice, started seriously mapping out what retiring early might actually look like if I kept living the way I preferred instead of the way my family thought success should be performed. The irony wasn't lost on me. The sister they had treated like she didn't understand life was on track to buy freedom before 45. Vivian, meanwhile, kept working. Retail first, then administrative work for a pediatric therapy office, where, according to Leela, she discovered the profound spiritual truth that standing on your feet for 8 hours changes your relationship to luxury. She was still married, still in therapy, still making payments, That her social media had gone quiet, then returned in a completely different register. Fewer glossy photos, more ordinary ones. Children in the backyard, a crockpot recipe, a birthday cake made at home instead of catered under custom lighting. When I saw her at family gatherings, she was polite, careful, sometimes genuinely kind in ways that were so unshowy they almost felt like another species of person. I did not mistake that for transformation completed, but I noticed it. Trust did not return. That was never the goal. Accuracy did. 2 years after that Thanksgiving, my mother hosted Easter brunch. I went. So did everyone else. The weather had finally turned soft. Windows open, spring air moving through the house, the smell of baked ham and coffee, and the cut flowers my mother had over-arranged into crystal vases. At one point, at one of the younger cousins, a college sophomore now, panicking about student debt and summer rent, asked if anyone knew how to compare private lenders. The old family reflex almost happened. I saw it. My mother's eyes moved toward Vivian, then stopped. Tessa looked at me first. Lila hid a smile in her mimosa. And my mother, after the smallest pause, said, "Ask Nora. She's the best person in this family to explain money." The room did not erupt. Nothing cinematic happened. No one gasped. No one cried. No one apologized under the chandelier. But something quiet and foundational shifted. I looked at my mother. She held my gaze for half a second too long, which for her counted as confession. Then I turned to my cousin and said, "Sure, bring me the numbers later." That was all. People think justice has to be loud to count. As sometimes it's just the right sentence said in the right room after years of the wrong one. I'm 36 now. I still live in the same condo, though it no longer feels like the defensive version of a life I had to explain. It feels like mine. Sunlight in the mornings across the hardwood floor, a blue ceramic bowl by the door for keys, a reading chair by the window where I sit on Sundays with coffee, and a legal pad and plan things that belong only to me. My car is still modest. My clothes are still simple. My work is still, to the untrained eye, just numbers. That's fine. I've stopped needing people who confuse spectacle with value to understand what a good life looks like. The final repayment will take years if she keeps going at the current pace. I don't count on speed, I count on pattern. And every month, when the notification appears, I feel the same thing. Not vindication, not forgiveness, just alignment. Money moving in the direction it should have all along. The thing about being the family scapegoat is that eventually you start performing the role for them. You pre-shrink, you pre-explain, you arrive already preparing to be misunderstood, and then call it maturity when you survive it quietly. The thing about stepping out of that role is not that everybody suddenly sees you correctly. Some people never will. It's that you stop handing them the pen. Last Sunday, I spent the afternoon on my balcony with a blanket over my legs and my laptop open to an investment projection I actually found relaxing. The sky was pale blue. Somewhere below, a child was practicing a violin badly and with real commitment. As my phone buzzed once with the monthly transfer notification, I opened it, $500, on time. Then another message, separate from the transfer, no speech, just one line from Vivian. Still going. I looked at it for a long moment, then I typed back, "I know," and I did. Not just about the payment, about everything that had taken me too long to understand. I knew that love without respect is just hunger and nicer clothes. I knew that usefulness is not the same as being valued. I knew that silence can be dignified, but it can also be surrender wearing a neutral face. And I knew that the most powerful thing I had ever done was not expose my sister. It was stop protecting the lie that required me to disappear. The violin below missed another note. As the breeze moved through the plants by the balcony rail and lifted the corner of the paper on my lap. I adjusted it with one hand, picked up my coffee with the other, and went back to planning my future with the money I finally kept.